Blood. There was so much blood. Adaise Okonkwo pressed herself against the cold brick wall of the alley. Her hand clamped over her mouth to stop the scream clawing its way up her throat like a living thing trying to escape. 10 meters away, maybe less, her mind was too fractured to measure distance properly. A man lay dead on the ground, his expensive charcoal suit soaking in a pool of crimson that spread like dark wings across the wet pavement. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but water still pooled in the uneven concrete, mixing with blood to create grotesque patterns that looked almost artistic in the dim sodium light. And standing over him, gun still in hand, smoke curling from the barrel like a spirit departing, was the most beautiful man Ada had ever seen. He was tall, easily 6 feet, dressed in all black that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face looked carved from marble by an artist who understood both perfection and cruelty. Sharp jaw that could cut glass, perfect nose, cheekbones that cast shadows even in the dim light, and eyes so dark they looked like they held no soul. No warmth. No humanity. Just an endless void where a person should be. He lowered the gun slowly, almost gracefully, like a dancer completing a movement, and turned his head with the careful precision of a predator sensing prey. Those soulless eyes locked onto hers. It suddenly felt like time stopped still at that moment. The world narrowed to just 2 people, the killer and the witness. "Well," he said in Korean, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous, carrying easily across the space between them. "This is unfortunate." Ada's phone, which was her lifeline, and her only connection to safety to her old life, slipped from her trembling fingers. Her muscles had stopped obeying her. Her entire body was shutting down, overwhelmed by terror so pure it felt like drowning. The phone clattered against the pavement. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence. The beautiful man's expression didn't change. He didn't smile, didn't frown. He simply observed her with the clinical detachment of someone examining an insect. "Get her," he said quietly to the shadows behind him. And Ada, who had survived Lagos streets, who had fought her way to Seoul against impossible odds, who never gave up on anything. Ada ran. She ran without looking back. She ran like she was being chased by death itself. Because she was. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more amazing stories. Ada's life in Seoul could be summed up in 3 words. Work, study, survive. At 24, she was a third-year medical student at Seoul National University, which sounded impressive when she said it. People's eyes would light up with respect, with assumptions of privilege and opportunity. They saw the prestigious university name and imagined wealth, family support, a bright future stretching ahead like a golden road. They didn't see the reality. Ada lived in a gashowan the size of a closet, and she meant that literally, not as some poetic exaggeration. For square meters of space contained a bed that folded up against the wall, a desk that folded down from the opposite wall, and a window that looked directly at another building's concrete facade. The shared bathroom was down the hall, used by 20 other struggling students and workers. The walls were so thin she could hear her neighbors breathing at night. Sometimes she heard them crying in the darkness. She understood completely. Some nights, when the weight became unbearable, she cried too. She worked 3 part-time jobs that consumed virtually every hour not spent in class or sleeping. Morning shift at Paris Baguette in Gangnam, where wealthy housewives bought artisanal bread that cost more than Ada's daily food budget. Afternoon classes where she struggled to stay awake, while professors discussed complex medical procedures. Evening shift at a GS25 convenience store, where drunk businessmen stumbled in at midnight asking if she spoke English, Korean, or both, depending on what they wanted from her. She hadn't had a full night's sleep in 6 months, maybe longer. Her body ran on caffeine, instant ramen that cost less than 1,001 per package, and pure determination that was perhaps the only thing keeping her functional. She was Nigerian, from Lagos, and from a middle-class family that had fallen on catastrophically hard times. Here on a student visa that felt more like a ticking time bomb than an opportunity for advancement. Every 6 months she had to prove to immigration authorities that she could afford to stay in their country. Had to show bank statements that barely scraped by the minimum requirements after she pooled everyone she'd managed to save. Had to smile politely at immigration officers who looked at her application with barely concealed suspicion, clearly wondering why a girl from Lagos thought she belonged in their prestigious educational system. Because I have no choice, she wanted to tell them. Because everything depends on me. But she never said those words aloud. She just smiled and provided whatever documentation they requested, and prayed they wouldn't find a reason to deny her visa renewal. Back home in Lagos, her mother was dying slowly and painfully from kidney failure that had reached stage 4. The doctors had given her 2 years to live, maybe 3 if she could somehow afford regular dialysis treatments. But dialysis costs money the family simply didn't have. Money that Adda sent home every single month, scraped together from 3 jobs and skipped meals and walking instead of taking buses. Her younger siblings, Chidi, 15 and brilliant, and Amara, 12 and still innocent, needed school fees that seemed to increase every term. Needed uniforms that had to be replaced as they grew. Needed textbooks and supplies and examination fees. Needed a future that didn't look like their present circumstances. Her father worked himself into the ground at his bank job, a position that paid less every year as Nigeria's economy continued its troubled trajectory. He worked overtime without additional compensation, came in on weekends when the bank needed extra hands, sacrificed holidays and family time in a desperate attempt to keep them afloat. And despite giving everything he had to give, it still wasn't enough to cover their mounting expenses and debts. Everything depended on Adda. Get the medical degree. Become a doctor. Get a high-paying position. Save everyone. No pressure at all. You look like death, her roommate Jiyoung had said that morning when Ada stumbled out of her room at 5:30 for her bakery shift. Jiyoung was an art student from a wealthy Busan family, slumming it in Agashwan because she wanted to experience real life before returning to her family's considerable wealth. She meant well with her concern, but there was something fundamentally different between choosing temporary hardship as an educational experience and being trapped in it with no escape route visible. "I'll sleep when I'm dead," Adda had replied with dark humor that had become her default coping mechanism, shoving her feet into worn sneakers that were developing holes in the soles. She couldn't afford new ones yet. Maybe next month, if she picked up extra shifts and no unexpected expenses materialized. "At this rate, that's going to be soon," Jiyoung had said, genuine worry evident in her voice. "Adda, seriously, you're going to collapse if you keep pushing yourself like this." "I'm fine," Adda had assured her, deploying the smile she perfected over 3 years living in Seoul. The smile that said everything was under control. "Don't worry, I can handle this." "You're not fine," Jiyoung had insisted, her artist's eye seeing through the performance. "You haven't been fine since I met you." Adda had kept smiling and gathered her things and left before Jiyoung could continue the conversation, before her roommate's concern could crack through the careful walls Adda had built around her emotions. But Jiyoung was absolutely right. Adda wasn't fine. At all. Some mornings, she woke up without any memory of falling asleep the night before. Some afternoons she stood behind the bakery counter and realized 5 minutes had passed while she stared at nothing, her mind simply going blank as her overtaxed brain demanded rest. Some nights she counted her money and did the math: rent, food, mother's medication, siblings' school fees, tuition, and no matter how many times she recalculated, the numbers never added up to anything approaching sustainability. She was drowning in slow motion, sinking beneath the surface inch by inch, and no one could save her because no one else had the resources or capability to change her circumstances. She had to save herself. Had to somehow find a way to keep swimming until she reached shore. The shift at GS25 started at 8 that night. Adda clocked in, tied her hair back in a regular ponytail, and took her position behind the counter. Mr. Park, her manager, was a kind man in his 50s with graying hair and understanding eyes. He pretended not to notice when Adda ate expired food items from the discount shelf during her breaks. "You working tomorrow?" he asked, the same question he asked most nights. "Morning shift at the bakery, then back here in the evening," Adda confirmed, already exhausted just thinking about the schedule ahead. "You should rest," Mr. Park suggested gently, the same suggestion he made at least once a week. "I'll rest when I graduate," Adda replied, her standard response to this standard conversation. Mr. Park shook his head but said nothing further. What could he say? They both understood the reality of her situation. She needed everyone she could earn, and he couldn't pay her more than minimum wage. The evening rush came and went, businessmen buying beer and snacks, teenagers purchasing ramen and energy drinks for late-night study sessions, the occasional drunk stumbling in for cigarettes. By 11 o'clock, the store had emptied out. The overhead speakers played soft K-pop that Adda had learned to tune out. The refrigerators hummed their constant background noise. Just one more hour until midnight. Then the long walk home through Seoul's November cold because she couldn't afford a taxi and the last bus always left before her shift ended. Then maybe 4 hours of restless sleep before her alarm would shriek at 5 in the morning. Ada's eyes burned with fatigue. Her anatomy textbook lay open on the counter behind her, but the words kept blurring together. She'd read the same paragraph about renal function 4 times now, and still couldn't remember what it said. The irony wasn't lost on her. Studying kidneys while her mother's kidneys were failing thousands of miles away. The door chimed its electronic melody. 3 men walked into the convenience store. And immediately, before Ada's conscious mind had fully processed their appearance, every survival instinct she developed over 24 years began screaming warnings in the back of her mind. These instincts had been honed through growing up in Lagos where danger could appear without warning, refined through 3 years of being a black woman alone in a foreign country, and sharpened through countless night shifts dealing with unwanted attention. These 3 men were different from regular customers. They wore expensive suits, but not the kind businessmen wore to offices. These were tailored with perfect precision, fitted like second skins, the kind that announced wealth and power to anyone with eyes to see. They moved through the store with coordinated grace that suggested professional training, aware of their surroundings in a way that seemed almost predatory. The man in front was beautiful in a way that made Ada's breath catch despite the warning bells clanging in her mind. Tall, easily 6 feet with perfectly styled black hair. Sharp aristocratic features, high cheekbones, strong jawline, straight nose. The kind of face that could sell anything in advertisements. The kind of looks that seemed almost inhuman in their perfection. But his eyes destroyed any fantasy his beautiful face might have created. They were completely empty, like looking into a frozen lake in winter. Beautiful on the surface, dead underneath. Ada watched from the corner of her eye as the 3 men browsed the aisles with eerie silence. They didn't talk to each other, didn't laugh, just moved with practiced efficiency, selecting items with careful precision. A bottle of expensive whiskey from the top shelf, a pack of imported cigarettes, several bottles of water. Nothing about their selections required them to be here, at this particular store at this particular hour. When the beautiful one approached the counter with his purchases, Ada's hands began trembling slightly. Up close he was even more striking and even more terrifying. She could see the quality of his suit's fabric. Definitely wool, probably Italian, certainly designer. Could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive. Could see the Rolex on his wrist that probably cost more than her entire education. But it was his eyes that truly paralyzed her when they met hers for just a second during the transaction. In that single second of eye contact, Ada felt like she was looking at something fundamentally wrong. Something that wore human skin but wasn't quite human underneath. "Credit card," he said in Korean. Not a question. A statement of fact. Ada rang up his items with shaking hands, fingers fumbling slightly with the register. The total came to 47,001. He handed her a black credit card, the kind that signified unlimited credit, the kind banks only issued to their wealthiest clients. Their fingers brushed during the exchange. His skin felt cold against hers. Unnaturally cold. "Thank you," Ada said automatically in Korean, using the formal language required for customers. "Have a good night." He looked at her for another second, those dead eyes studying her face with uncomfortable intensity, as though memorizing every detail. Then he left without saying another word. His 2 companions followed silently behind him. The door chimed, and by the time she looked up, they were gone. Ada realized she'd been holding her breath the entire time. She let it out slowly, shakily. Her hands were still trembling. Her heart pounded harder than it should from such a brief interaction. "Get it together," she whispered to herself. "You're being paranoid." But she wasn't being paranoid. Every instinct she possessed was screaming that those men were dangerous. That the beautiful one was someone she should never ever see again. Unbeknownst to her, that she would see him again in less than 2 hours. And when she did, her life as she knew it would take a drastic turn. Ada's shift ended at midnight. She clocked out, said goodbye to Mr. Park, and stepped into Seoul's November cold that had intensified during the hour she'd been inside. The temperature had dropped significantly. Her thin coat, purchased secondhand 3 years ago, now worn almost to threads, did nothing against the wind that cut through Gangnam streets. Ada pulled it tighter and walked faster, her breath visible in white clouds that dissipated immediately. The last bus had already left at 11:30. A taxi would cost 15,000 won. Money she desperately needed for food, for bills, for her mother's medication. That left walking as her only option. 30 minutes to her Gashawon through the cold and dark, with feet that already ached from standing multiple shifts and a body screaming for rest. Adda started walking, her worn sneakers making soft sounds against the pavement. Gangnam at night was a different world entirely. During the day it was all luxury stores and beautiful people, and the overwhelming sense that Adda didn't belong in such a place. At night, it transformed into something simultaneously more glamorous and more menacing. Club music pounded from basement venues. Drunk businessmen stumbled along sidewalks. Women in expensive dresses and impossibly high heels smoked outside bars, their breath creating vapor clouds in the cold air. Adda walked through it all as an invisible presence. Just another foreigner. Another worker. Another nobody in a city of 10 million people all trying to survive. When she reached the entrance to the alley, the shortcut she knew she shouldn't take but had taken dozens of times before because it saved 10 precious minutes of walking, Adda hesitated at the opening. The alley cut between two tall buildings in a narrow passage that was poorly lit. During the day it was fine. Delivery people used it. Shop workers dumped trash in the dumpsters. But at night, shadows dominated and safety felt like a distant concept. Her mother's voice echoed in her head with Lagos wisdom. Nothing good happens in dark places, Adda. Nothing good happens when you take shortcuts. You go the long way. Always the long way. But Adda was so tired her bones ached with it. So cold her fingers were going numb despite being shoved into her pockets. So desperate to reach her bed in 4 hours of sleep before her alarm went off at 5. The shortcut would save 10 minutes. 10 precious minutes that translated to 10 more minutes of rest. Just this once, Adda whispered to the empty street, making the same promise she'd made dozens of times before. She turned into the alley. The passage seemed narrower than she remembered, or perhaps darkness made it feel more confined. The industrial dumpsters cast long shadows that looked like crouching figures. A single streetlight flickered irregularly overhead, creating a strobe effect that made everything appear unreal and threatening. Adda walked quickly, keys clutched between the fingers of her right hand the way her father had taught her. If you ever have to fight, he told her with serious intensity, you go for the eyes. Don't hesitate. Don't worry about being fair. You aim for the eyes. Halfway through the alley, moving at a pace just short of running, Adda heard voices that made her freeze in place. Angry voices speaking Korean too rapidly for her to follow, but the tone was universally clear. Argument heading toward violence. Threat barely contained. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around immediately. Walk away. Mind her business. This wasn't her country, her fight, her problem. But she was already halfway through, already committed to this path, and that terrible human curiosity made her pause when she should have run. Made her wonder what was happening despite knowing that knowing could be dangerous. Made her peek around the edge of a dumpster to see what was causing the commotion. Made her see everything she should never have seen. 5 men stood in a rough circle in the widest part of the alley. 4 surrounded the 5th, who was on his knees on the wet pavement with his hands bound behind his back with zip ties. He was older, perhaps 50, wearing an expensive suit that was torn and dirty now. Blood ran from his nose in dark rivulets. One eye was swollen completely shut. Adda recognized 3 of the standing men immediately with a shock that felt like ice water being poured over her. Those were the men from the convenience store. The beautiful one with the dead eye stood directly in front of the kneeling man, and now he held a gun in his right hand with casual ease. The same gun that had been concealed under his jacket when he paid for whiskey and cigarettes less than 2 hours ago. Adda's breath stopped in her throat. Her heart stopped in her chest. Time itself seemed to stop. Please, the kneeling man begged in Korean. Adda understood that word. Everyone understood that word in any language. Please, boss. I have a wife, children. My daughter just started university. You stole from my family, Hyunsik. The beautiful man's voice was calm and conversational, like discussing weather or traffic. 5 billion won. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? 5 billion won. Adda's mind did the math automatically. Over $4 million US. An impossible amount of money. More money than existed in Adda's entire world. I was desperate. I had debts. The loan sharks were going to kill my son. You should have come to me. Asked for help. Instead you stole. The beautiful man crouched down to the kneeling man's level, and Adda saw his face clearly in the dim light. No anger. No rage. Just complete emptiness. You betrayed my father's trust. My trust. For that, there is only one consequence. Please, please, I'll pay it back, everyone. I swear on my children's lives. You can't pay back what you've already spent. The beautiful man stood slowly, raising the gun with practiced ease that spoke of extensive experience. Professional. Someone who'd done this many times before. Goodbye, Hyun-sik. Your family will be taken care of. That's more mercy than you deserve. Adda wanted to run. Wanted to close her eyes. Wanted to scream, to intervene, to do something, anything. But she was frozen, trapped by horror and disbelief, and the surreal wrongness of watching someone about to die. The kneeling man looked up, tears streaming down his face, and in that moment Adda saw him as a complete person. Someone's father. Someone's husband. Someone who made a terrible mistake and was about to pay the ultimate price. Please, he whispered one final time. The beautiful man pulled the trigger. The gunshot shattered the night. Not as loud as movies made it seem, but loud enough. A sharp crack that echoed off brick walls and seemed to linger in the air long after the sound should have faded. The man crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. His body folded in on itself with terrible finality. Blood spread across the wet pavement like spilled ink. Like oil. Like something that shouldn't exist outside the human body but suddenly did. Way too much of it, spreading in an expanding pool that reflected the flickering streetlight above. Adda couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. And worse, she couldn't process what she just witnessed. Murder. She just watched a murder happen right in front of her. The beautiful man handed the gun to one of his companions with casual ease, like passing over car keys after a drive. He pulled out a handkerchief, silk, probably expensive, and wiped blood spatter from his face with methodical precision. A few drops had landed on his perfect cheek, making him look even more unreal in the dim light. A demon. An angel of death wearing human skin. Clean this up, he said in Korean, his voice carrying clearly despite its quiet tone. Make it look like gang violence. Frame it on Choi's territory. Let them take the blame and deal with police attention. The men moved with practiced efficiency, already pulling supplies from a bag one of them carried. They'd obviously done this before. Would do it again. And Adda, frozen behind her dumpster, watching everything unfold like a nightmare she couldn't wake from, finally understood the magnitude of her mistake. She'd witnessed something she absolutely shouldn't have. Seen something she could never unsee. Knew something that would definitely get her killed if these men discovered her presence. Her phone, her stupid, treacherous phone that she'd completely forgotten she was holding in her trembling hand, slipped from her numb fingers. Fell in what seemed like slow motion. Adda watched it tumble end over end, watched it descend toward the pavement, watched with growing horror as it hit the concrete with a clatter that sounded like thunder in the sudden silence. Sounded like an explosion. Almost like the loudest sound that had ever existed in the history of the universe. The clatter echoed through the alley, bouncing off walls, announcing her presence. Every head turned in unison. There were exactly 4 men. And they were all staring directly at her hiding place. And the beautiful man, Kim Tae-jun, though she didn't know his name yet. His cold, dead eyes locked onto hers with the precision of a weapon finding its target, with the accuracy of a predator identifying prey. Time stopped again. Adda saw his face clearly now in the flickering streetlight. Saw the blood on his perfect cheek that he'd missed with his handkerchief. Saw the complete lack of emotion in his expression as he processed her presence, as his mind calculated what her witnessing meant. Saw him make a decision in real time, weighing her life against his convenience, measuring her value against the risk she represented. He looked at her the way someone might look at an insect they discovered in their pristine home. Interesting for perhaps a moment. Then just an annoyance to be dealt with efficiently. Get her, he said quietly, those 2 simple words delivered with perfect calm. 2 words that sealed her fate. And just like that, in the span of a heartbeat, Adda's life as she knew it ended completely. Adda ran like death itself was chasing her, because it absolutely was. She burst from behind the dumpster and sprinted back toward the main street with every ounce of strength her exhausted body could muster. Her backpack bounced painfully against her spine with each stride. Her lungs burned instantly. 18-hour days and a body running on fumes couldn't sustain this kind of exertion. Behind her, heavy footsteps pounded against pavement. Fast. Professional. Getting closer with each passing second. Shouting in Korean echoed through the alley. Commands being barked. Coordinates being called out. They were coordinating their pursuit with professional efficiency, working together like a well-trained unit. Ada's vision tunneled as panic overrode rational thought. Her body operated on pure adrenaline and animal survival instinct. The alley seemed impossibly longer than before, stretching endlessly ahead of her like something from a nightmare. The main street with its lights and people and safety seemed miles away instead of mere meters. Move. 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 She burst onto the main street like a drowning person breaking the surface for air. Cars passed by in normal traffic patterns. People walked along sidewalks living their ordinary lives. A couple strolled hand in hand, laughing at something one of them had said. A taxi drove past with its light on, searching for fares. Civilization. Safety. Witnesses to whatever might happen next. She could scream for help. Could flag down that taxi. Could run into one of the still open shops. Could call the police. A hand grabbed her backpack from behind with bruising force. Ada screamed, the sound raw and terrified, twisting violently to break free. The cheap strap finally gave way after years of abuse and the sudden violent strain. She stumbled forward, free but completely off balance. Her backpack fell to the pavement behind her, contents spilling everywhere. Her anatomy textbook landed spine up, pages bending. Her wallet skidded across concrete. Her entire life scattering across Gangnam sidewalk. She didn't stop to gather anything. Didn't look back to see what she was losing. Just kept running forward on legs that were threatening to give out beneath her. Behind her, more cursing in Korean. Close. Way too close. Gangnam Station loomed ahead with its bright lights and multiple entrances. She could see people going in and out even at this late hour. The subway ran until 1 a.m. If she could just reach it, could get inside where there were security cameras and station employees and crowds of people. A black car screeched to a halt directly in her path, cutting off her escape route. Ada tried desperately to stop, to change direction, but momentum carried her forward. She slammed into the side of the vehicle with brutal force, pain exploding through her shoulder where she made contact. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs. The back door opened with ominous purpose. The beautiful man, the killer, stepped out with unhurried grace, as though he had all the time in the world and wasn't in the middle of chasing down a witness to murder. Up close, with nowhere to run and no dumpster to hide behind, he was even more terrifying than before. Tall enough that Ada had to tilt her head back to see his face properly. His suit remained perfect despite the violence, despite the chase, despite everything that had just happened. His face showed absolutely no exertion, no stress and no emotion whatsoever. No humanity at all. "You run surprisingly fast," he said in perfect English without any trace of an accent, probably educated abroad at expensive international schools. His tone carried something that might have been admiration in someone capable of genuine emotion. For someone who works 3 jobs and survives on convenience store food and 4 hours of sleep per night, the fact that he was speaking English, that he knew to use her native language, sent ice water through Ada's veins. The fact that he knew details about her life made everything infinitely worse. "Please," Ada managed to gasp out, still trying to catch her breath from the impact and the sprint. She backed away slowly, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Please, I won't tell anyone. I didn't see anything. I don't know anything." "You saw everything," he interrupted calmly, tilting his head slightly as he studied her like a particularly interesting specimen. Ada Izokonkwo, age 24, third-year medical student at Seoul National University. Originally from Lagos, Nigeria. Mother dying of stage 4 kidney failure in Lagos. Father works at First Bank of Nigeria. 2 younger siblings, Chidi, age 15 and Amara, age 12. You work morning shifts at Paris Baguette in Gangnam, attend afternoon classes at SNU Medical School, and work evening shifts at GS25 convenience store. You're currently 4.5 million won behind on your tuition payments. Your student visa expires in exactly 6 months. You live in Agashwan in Gangbuk, room 307. You send 200,001 home to Lagos every month for your mother's dialysis treatments. Last month you could only send 150,000 because your building's water heater broke, and you had to contribute to the repair costs. Each fact he recited was another nail in Ada's coffin. Each detail proved how thoroughly she'd been investigated, how completely known she was, how impossibly trapped she'd become. He must have had someone research her while they were chasing her, or perhaps even before, the moment he saw her in the convenience store. How? Ada's voice broke with fear and confusion. How do you know all that? I make it my business to know everything about everyone who might become a problem. He replied with terrifying simplicity, as though this were the most natural thing in the world. He took a measured step forward. Ada took a corresponding step backward, but her shoulders hit the car behind her. Nowhere left to retreat. And you, Miss Okonkwo, have unfortunately become a very significant problem for me tonight. I'm nobody, Ada said desperately, hating how her voice shook but unable to control it. Terror overwhelmed any sense of pride. I'm nothing to you. I won't tell anyone what I saw. I'll forget everything. Please just let me go. You're a medical student, which means you're intelligent and observant by both training and necessity, he said, those dead eyes scanning her face with uncomfortable precision. You've already memorized every relevant detail, even if you don't realize it yet. My face, my voice, my approximate height and build, the gun's make and model, the victim's appearance, the location, the time. Even if you genuinely wanted to forget, your mind has already filed everything away. The police would have an excellent witness in you. I won't go to the police, Ada practically shouted, desperation making her voice rise. I know you won't, he agreed calmly. The police already know exactly who I am and what I do. They can't touch me due to various arrangements and protections. But you represent something much more problematic, uncertainty, a variable I cannot control. And I have built my entire life around controlling variables and eliminating uncertainties. Behind him, his two companions had caught up, breathing slightly heavier from the chase. They surrounded Ada's position, blocking any possible escape route she might have considered. Get in the car, the beautiful man said simply, as though offering her a ride home rather than issuing what was clearly a command. No, Ada said, the word coming out as barely more than a whisper. Miss Okonkwo. No. Ada's voice grew stronger, fed by desperation and the last remnants of her courage. She looked around wildly at the people passing by on the sidewalk. Several were watching now, phones coming out to record the confrontation. You can't. There are witnesses everywhere. People are recording this. His smile was absolutely the most terrifying thing Ada had ever seen. Not cruel. Not angry. Just utterly empty, devoid of anything resembling human warmth or conscience. Get in the car, he repeated, his voice dropping to something quietly dangerous that made her survival instinct scream. Or I will kill you right here and now. Snap your neck. It takes approximately 3 seconds if you know the correct technique, which I do. Then I will be forced to eliminate everyone currently recording us on their phones. That man checking his messages while pretending not to watch. That young couple walking their small dog across the street. The taxi driver stopped at that red light. That woman visible through the convenience store window. The security guard having a cigarette outside that building in trance. He gestured casually to each person as he mentioned them, marking them for death with a simple point of his finger. How many innocent people do you want to die tonight because you said no to me? Ada looked desperately at the people around her. The ordinary citizens just trying to live their lives. A young couple who looked like newlyweds, laughing together about something private. An old man walking his tiny dog with obvious affection. A woman working a late shift in a convenience store just like Ada had been doing an hour ago. A security guard who probably had a family waiting at home. People exactly like her. People trying to survive. People who didn't deserve to die because Ada had made the mistake of walking through a dark alley. This is your choice to make, the beautiful man said softly, his voice carrying clearly despite barely being above a whisper. Come with me willingly and quietly, and all these people continue living their normal lives. They go home to their families tonight. They wake up tomorrow morning. They remain blissfully ignorant of how close they came to death. Or refuse my very reasonable request, and I will paint this entire street red with their blood. I will do it without hesitation, without regret, without losing a single night of sleep over it. So choose quickly, Miss Okonkwo. My patience has limits. Ada looked into his eyes and saw absolute truth. He would do exactly what he promised. Would kill everyone in sight. Would sleep perfectly well afterward. This was a man for whom human life held no particular value beyond utility. Her hands shaking violently, tears streaming down her face unchecked, her entire body trembling with fear and horror, and the knowledge that her old life was ending right here on this Gangnam street. Ada got into the car. The beautiful man slid in beside her with fluid grace. One of his companions took the driver's seat. The other got in the front passenger side. The door closed with a sound like a coffin lid sealing. The car pulled smoothly into traffic, just another vehicle in Seoul's endless stream, completely unremarkable from the outside. Inside, Ada pressed herself against the opposite door, making herself as small as possible, trying to maintain maximum distance from the monster sitting beside her. Her whole body shook with shock and terror. Silent tears continued running down her face, leaving tracks through the dirt and sweat accumulated during her desperate flight. Smart choice, he said conversationally, pulling out his silk handkerchief again to carefully wipe the last traces of blood from his face. I would have genuinely hated to make a scene in front of so many cameras. I'm wearing my favorite suit, and blood is remarkably difficult to remove from wool, even with professional cleaning. Ada couldn't speak. Her throat had closed completely. Words seemed impossible when her brain was still trying to process everything that had happened in the last 10 minutes. Witnessing a murder, being chased through alleys, being captured by a killer who knew everything about her life. Are you going to kill me? She finally managed to whisper, the question barely audible even in the quiet interior of the expensive car. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied her face with that same clinical interest he'd shown before, like a scientist examining something unexpected under a microscope. The silence stretched out unbearably, broken only by the soft sound of traffic outside and the low hum of the car's engine. That depends entirely on several factors, he finally said. On what? Ada forced herself to meet his eyes, though everything in her screamed to look away from that empty gaze. On how useful you prove to be to me in the coming days and weeks. He folded his blood-stained handkerchief with precise movements and tucked it back into his jacket pocket. On whether you possess the intelligence to understand your situation and adapt accordingly. On your capacity for obedience and discretion. On whether you turn out to be more valuable alive than dead. He extended his hand toward her, palm up, like they were at a business meeting rather than a kidnapping. Kim Tae-jun, heir to the Kim crime family, which controls approximately 40% of organized criminal operations in Seoul. And as of this moment, I am your new employer. Ada stared at his outstretched hand like it was a venomous snake preparing to strike. You're completely insane, she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. Practical, actually. He corrected without any trace of offense at her assessment. He withdrew his hand, apparently unbothered by her refusal to shake it. You witnessed a murder that I committed. This presents me with exactly 3 possible courses of action. First option. Kill you immediately, which would be wasteful because you're clearly intelligent, educated, and possess a certain strength of character that I find potentially valuable. Second option. Let you go free, which would be phenomenally stupid because you're a witness who could potentially cause problems despite your protests to the contrary. Third option. Keep you under my control and supervision, which is by far the most practical solution to this dilemma. Keep me? Like some kind of prisoner. Ada's voice cracked on the last word. Like an employee, as I said before, he clarified. Though admittedly, the line between those 2 categories may seem somewhat blurred from your current perspective. If you demonstrate intelligence and obedience, you might not only survive this situation, but potentially thrive within the new circumstances. If you prove to be foolish or disobedient, then your survival becomes considerably less likely. And if I refuse, if I'm not willing to work for a murderer, then you die obviously, he said with the same casual tone someone might use to discuss weather forecasts. But I don't think you'll refuse. You're a survivor, Miss Okonkwo. Everything about your life up until this point proves that. Foreign student with no family support in Korea. Crushing debt that would destroy most people. Dying mother depending on your financial assistance. You work 3 jobs simultaneously, while maintaining your medical school grades. You've survived impossible odds so far through sheer determination and willpower. Survivors make the best employees because they understand that adaptation is preferable to extinction. Adda turned away from him to stare out the window at Seoul passing by in a blur of lights and buildings. Somewhere in this massive city, Ji-young was probably wondering why Adda hadn't come home yet. Her professors would mark her absent from tomorrow's classes. Her managers would call asking why she didn't show up for her shifts. Her mother would wait anxiously for the weekly phone call that wouldn't come. And Adda would be, what? Prisoner? Employee? Property of a crime family? Dead girl still walking? Where are you taking me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Home, Kim Tae-jun said, and somehow the word sounded more like a threat than a comfort. My home, to be specific. Welcome to your new life, Miss Okonkwo. I suggest you adapt quickly. The car continued driving through Gangnam's glittering streets, past wealth and safety and normal lives that Adda would never experience again. And beside her, the most beautiful killer in Seoul sat with perfect posture and dead eyes, waiting patiently to see if she would break. Several hours later, the car pulled into the underground parking garage of one of Gangnam's most exclusive residential towers, the kind of building where monthly maintenance fees probably exceeded Adda's yearly income.